With me, it's just a hello.
It'll get there.
Hello, and welcome to the second part of our commentary series, specifically about the first episode of Dualistic Unity, Scratching the Surface. So this is a commentary on the second half of that episode. If you are looking for the exact point where we left off, it would be at the 28-minute and 28-second mark. So you can continue on there if you're following along at home. Of course, we're going to continue on here. The episode, or rather, the last episode ended where we were originally talking about collective awareness, that Andrew moving his hand is, in fact, me moving his hand, if you look at it in a way where there is no ownership over that collective I, where you recognize it as one singular body or one singular awareness in motion. And so we can continue on there, but I'll pass it over to Andrew first.
Yeah, I love that first episode ended with the hand wave. Like, well, you're not waving my hand, or you can't wave my right hand. Oddly enough, I just did. That's like, one of my favorite. I mean, probably one of my favorite parts of all of our episodes was that, because that so succinctly kind of not explains everything, but is just showing the maintenance of perspectives and then the reality of what's actually going on. And that, because in that spot, which we'll probably see in a bit here, was like I wasn't even remotely close. Not that there's like close, and even now, as I'm saying, it's like, paradox and whatnot, and you can too heavily invest. Anyway, I'm fucking gonna just fucking ramble. I'm fucking pumped for this. I'm really enjoying these. So yeah, let's go. Yeah.
Now, again, I spent 20 years and just unpacking this. And I know you're saying, like, I don't know if I fully get that. Neither do I.
Yeah.
What I can say is that in my moments of clarity, yeah, it rings through. The deeper it goes, the more clear I become, the more obvious it is that the entirety of reality is just one thing. It's just, when you've said it many, many times, it's difficult to let go of me. It's difficult to let go of the idea of me.
I think I pretty close to fully understand the idea that we're all the same thing. It's interesting, like when people will ask, well, how can we be the same? Like, is it just that strong of an illusion that I feel like, right now I'm waving Andrew's right hand and you can't wave my right hand?
Oddly enough,
right,
I just did.
right. Or the thoughts inside of my head, I can hear them,
Right. And I'm
but
hearing
you
them as
can't.
you. But you see, that's the point, right? We get caught up in the idea of you and me being separate. Like, suddenly, you being able to experience yourself somehow negates the fact that you're also me. Right? You can't experience what Ray's experiencing because Ray's busy experiencing it and you're busy being Andrew. It's really tricky because, and here's the paradoxical bit, right? Because we talk.
And so I think this, I fucking love love this part, because like, even that, as you're talking, like, I don't like, we went so fucking deep in the first episode, like so quick, but it can be that conceptual sort of expression, like, oh, I think I'm kind of getting that we're all the same thing. And it's very much like the connection, like, you know, computers being connected, but still being the computer, as opposed to being the entirety of the situation itself. Like, I am this cell in a body. I see that there are other cells that I am connected to, but then there's still the recognition or the realization that you're the body, which again, like, isn't this fucking conceptual thing you put in a box and you're like, this is it. It's like, it runs so deep into everything that we do. So, yeah, at this point, it was very much like trying to grasp it conceptually, so I could understand, not understand it, but be able to explain it.
It's fair, because I was at a point where I was grasping for a way to explain it while I was doing so in real time, because I'm trying to describe something that isn't necessarily conceptual. I'm trying to describe a lack of inner narrative, the experience of just being and recognizing that the observer and the observer is the same. Like, I'm talking about something that's hard to grasp even for me, despite all of the time that I've put into looking at it. It's it is difficult to talk about this in any way, shape, or form. So in this episode, I thought we did a really good job of kind of dancing around it and trying to get a grasp of what it is we were talking about, because that's all we can ever really do. That's all we're ever really doing. That's why I say I can't really teach how I see reality to anyone, but I can talk about how I see reality, and they can misinterpret it or continue to misinterpret it until finally they recognize that the distortion, the reason for their misinterpretation, is their own personal bias. And then once that's out of the way, they'll be like, oh shit, he's talking about the same stuff I'm going through. Anyway, shall we continue? Talk about everything being one, but we're still talking physically, right? We're still talking about the division between you and me, the perception of distance, right? That there's air and oxygen and physical land between us. But reality works in a very different way than that. Like, as much as that is true, that there is the physical, there is also the completely subjective. And the subjective is that without you here, there is no observed. Without the observer, there is no observed. And this is where reality gets really tricky, right? Because when you think of it in just terms of one being, let's just break it down to one being. So the void, which is why Genesis is such an interesting story, right? So we have the void, we have nothing, or rather we have the potential for everything. It's just unity. It could be anything, but it's not currently anything. It's just potential, right? In that comes the split, the perceptual split. It's not an actual split. It's just within that potential, there's the potential for the unity to observe itself as separate, right? So now you have the subjective reality of an objective reality. You have the observer and the observed, and they create each other. They are the same thing. They're not disconnected, right? So that is reality in a nutshell. That's your existence. You are not separate from your reality. The observer and the observed are one. Your awareness is reality itself. The paradoxical bit is that everything that is in the universe comes from you being the observer of the observed. So I'm within your consciousness. Everybody else is within your consciousness. Everybody else is within your awareness, and you're within ours. And that's the paradoxical bit, is that we're all within one another's awareness, and we experience it as a physical universe. And that's how messed up this is, which is why science is having so much problems trying to explain physical distance, why everything is connected. And again, the whole multi-universe theory, or multiple timelines, or alternate realities, because all of this stuff is real. All of its stuff is possible. Yet we can't explain why we can't just jump from one reality to another. And that's the age-old question. It's like, why? Why can't I? And it's like, is it just because I'm so committed to this? Exactly what you asked. Is it just because this seems so real? And that's what, your shamans of ages past have tried to get past. That's why the indigenous tribes of Australia call this the dream time. They actually look at this as the dream time. There are tribes in Africa, same thing, that we are multidimensional travelers who got trapped in an illusion. These are all old tribal myths way before science. So it's not a new conversation, right? But it comes back down to that question of what is possible? Exactly how real is this? And if I continue to question it, does that change the influence that we have over the observed? The more we break down that division between the observer and the observed, what does that change? What is possible for us as a species, or us as an awareness, which is a better question, right? This is where magic comes in. This is where all of this interesting, mysterious stuff starts to come into the conversation, because you can't. This is where reality becomes more fun, because all of a sudden everything is questionable, right? Even the nature of our own existence. Because I'll admit, I don't know I exist, and I mean that completely. I know that there is existence. I know that I'm experiencing existence, and I experience choice, but I also know that all of my choices are the result of the influences that I've had before now, and that, because of those influences altering my choice, I can't necessarily say that my choice is separate from the will of the whole. And if my
Mhm.
choice isn't separate from the will of the whole, then there's no real me, in which case it's just the whole, and that's me. So it just keeps coming full circle back to your existence.
Yeah, that got through. I get that. I think
I just wanted to say very quickly, I haven't seen this episode since forever. I love it. I love the fact that I just went through a bunch of shit that I up until that point had been just waiting to get off my chest. But while doing so, knowing most of it wasn't going to land, right? But all I can do is communicate it. And it's funny. I haven't necessarily looked back at this episode, but it's a pretty dope episode.
I want to have like it's so hard to hold off, and I like that we're giving time to like stuff, getting out because there's so much in there. But I love that my response was like, "Yeah, I get that. Yeah, yeah, for sure." But I do remember because right before I said like that one rang through, I remember, and because I got the same sort of feeling right there that oh, it was like the realization as you were talking through it, and it's funny that you said it in however way you said it, and it did because it hit me. I remember it hitting me that oh, if this very curious about it. But if you take this deep enough, like, yeah, that logically checks out if you are willing to look at it. Obviously, there's a fuckload of shit in there in that like 4-minute spiel right there. But if you're just willing to sit with it logically and not, think about yourself for a little bit, like it's very logical. And I've said like growing up, I was always very, very much logical. Like when things started to make sense or not make sense, when I really dug into it, be like, yeah, that makes a lot of, even if it wasn't necessarily what I was hearing around me. It's like that's a logical thing, that's an illogical thing. And again, logical, fucking just a subjective word, but yeah, like it totally checks out unless you're utilizing some form of cognitive dissonance.
And this is why I sent you that article yesterday about this new theory that the universe is in fact existing within a void. Because this is what I've been saying is that we have the perception of time because all of the potential variations of the relationship between the observer and the observed exist within existence, which is potential, right? But for that potential to be expressed, it would have to be expressed within a void, within itself. Not even a void, but still within itself, it's being expressed. The variation would experience it as being experienced within the void, but there's nothing really within the void because the void doesn't exist anywhere in space and time. So it's just the experience of it. The shit still just bakes my noodle. It's so much fun. So yeah, this is a great episode. And what's funny is that again, we're talking about this, we're going over it in the episode, knowing that there's so much more to unpack afterwards. And that's why I look forward to our commentary on episode 2, where again, you've had a psychedelic experience because then all of a sudden the stuff that I'm talking about here takes on an entirely different tone, sinks a little bit deeper. I remember there was a point where you sent me a video. It's like, wow, the stuff Ray says makes so much sense when I'm tripping balls.
Yeah, I remember making that video that yeah, I think I was just tripping. I think I was in New York walking around. I was like, oh, it's hitting. And just from, yeah, being a little bit more relaxed, it starts to ring through. That's something, the idea of whether or not we have free will, I think helps supplement this explanation pretty well. And the idea that there was never a choice, it seems like. It was like there were infinite possibilities which happened. And
here we are.
And here
And
we are.
and the story you mentioned of Genesis and how, infinite possibilities and unified whole becoming just not separate, but this illusion of separateness, and the observer and the observed being the same thing still, but it's like, I don't know, molded maybe into this idea of, instead of being a unified whole, now it looks like a tree, and there's, leaves on one side and leaves on the other, and they're all the tree, they're all the unified whole. It just seems like, they're different because, the wind's blowing on one side, that one's moving, it thinks it's moving, but
That's right.
it's not. It's the wind happening, which who knows where that comes from, somewhere else
Right.
probably, and the other one's not moving. So it's like, hey, I'm waving my hand over here, how can I do this and you can't wave my hand over here? And it's like, that doesn't take away from the fact that you're still the tree.
See, I thought that was well done. Admittedly, I thought that that was a fantastic leap of insight, and it was arrived at so very quickly. I had a moment where I'm like, "This is awesome." You can tell at this point I'm very excited about the conversation to the point where I almost won't shut the fuck up.
Yeah, you could perfect spot to pause it because you could see it on your face, like, oh fuck, that actually did ring through. That's actually a decent way of, and there's still a lot of questions there, but fucking hey, dude, yeah, yeah.
And so I think, yeah, the idea of, so when it comes to free will, because I think I've heard you talk about how, like, we do and we don't,
Mm.
from the idea of being a unified whole, there was an infinite, you know, possibilities, and we we it I don't know what the term is, created an illusion of separateness, or illusion of separateness manifested, and
Here we are.
years and years and years, etc. Here we are.
I can't tell you
And
how much I enjoy the fact that you're experiencing my hell in trying to communicate this with language. So I just wanted to say that this is exactly how I feel, and the reason I've been so quiet for so long is
yeah,
because it's not an easy subject,
yeah,
right?
it's
It's
fun
really
though.
not. It is fun.
I
Well, that's it. It's fun, and but it requires courage. It requires a good deal of courage to even entertain the idea that there aren't other people, right?
mhm,
And you have to be willing to go beyond the conventional idea of sanity, right? Like that, I've
yeah.
often said that awareness lies on the edge of sanity. I mean, you have to let go of the idea of being sane and insane in order to see what's there, because there's no such thing as insanity or sanity, right? Like it's just, we're just talking about cherry picking perspectives as what we like and what we don't like. It's like what you were saying about good and bad, right? Our perspective of good and bad always comes back down to what's pleasant or unpleasant for us, right? That's at the end of the day. And so because we view ourselves as separate, because we view ourselves as divided, death is terrifying. And so to us, everything that has to do with death is bad,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Whereas there are other cultures that never looked at death in that way. They looked at it as something that had to happen. Krishnamurti's journal was actually a good place to look for that, because watching a funeral procession one day in India, and there was all the mourning and the sadness, and he was just thinking, like, it's such a shame that we can't recognize this is the inevitability of so much joy, that this in itself is something to almost celebrate, because it's the end of a journey, or it's the beginning of another journey. It's the completion of a ripple that causes other ripples to happen. Like we lose that because we focus on what we're attached to,
mhm,
right?
yeah, yeah. So yeah, I don't want to get. We're gonna get to certain places on this podcast, I'm sure, but
Oh yeah, hopefully.
do you
For
do
sure.
you so do you think, in that sense of Krishnamurti's explanation there, that we almost like over try to overprotect to the degree that, everyone thinks death is objectively this horrible thing? I mean, I post that and I get a ton of DMs saying killing. That's like the one
Yeah.
response. Death is horrible. Death of loved ones and whatnot. And so, do you think we almost have become this society that's like overvalued
Yeah.
life, like individual lives,
Control.
or
I would say we
yeah.
overvalue control. And it's interesting, because I did a video a long time ago when I first started TikTok, just kind of talking about how intention, the path, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, right? So,
Yeah.
the reason we started agriculture was because up until that point, we had to live by the will of the land around us. If there wasn't enough food from year to year, our population diminished as a result. And that's what kept us in balance. And then we learned agriculture, and suddenly we had that taste of control. And so now we could just farm more food and less people in our tribe would die, which had to be a good thing, right? Like, where nobody's dying, that's a bad thing. So people living has got to be a good thing. But then you look about 1,000 years later, and that tribe that people aren't dying in is suddenly amassed into many tribes that are 10,000 strong, and they're running out of land to grow food on. So now they're looking at their neighbors' territory who haven't been farming, who have smaller people who are still in balance, and they have to take over that territory. So all of a sudden now, in the name of not dying, we are killing. And we're justifying killing because we want their land. This is something, again, Krishnamurti said, is that progress is inevitably being fully armed on enemy lines. And eventually, you need to expand into other territory because progress never ends. The entire concept of progress is that we're always needing more. We're always doing more. It's like, when is enough enough? Right? So, in our pursuit of avoiding death, we perpetuate death. Right? In our pursuit of avoiding loss, we create more loss. And there's a balance in that. That's why the indigenous tribes in North America, they always looked at things in terms of 7 generations, right? Like, if we're going to make a decision that's
I just want to say how well done. I think that shift from me wondering about death and overvaluing life to then immediately you expressing how it's about control. It's not necessarily about life and death. It's about trying to be able to control things that inevitably leads to situations like with agriculture where we choose something, think we're in control, have control over this. It, leads to something else. It's almost like fuck, what's the toy where you push one part of it and another part sticks out, and then you push that back in, and another part sticks out. I don't know. There's something out there, but that's kind of what I'm feeling from this, and just how often we'll think one thing, think that's the best thing, and just try to immediately fucking come to an answer, and it'll lead to all of these other repercussions. And it's almost like how quickly we try and come to that answer or gain control or certainty, like we saw with something like COVID. Like, the more repercussions there are versus the longer we're willing to be like, maybe I don't know, maybe I don't know, maybe I don't know. Then, and like, you can kind of run with that for a while, like your whole life, because then coming to a certainty then kind of is like closing your eyes. It's that distraction. So anyway, just 2 years ago, Ray, fucking well done.
going to change how our tribe lives, whether it's, we're going to start farming oysters, or we're going to start, cutting down this particular part of the forest, which of course is not the point. But if we're going to do something, we need to consider how this is going to affect life 7 generations down the road. And that's why, we look at their progression as a tribe to be a slow progression technologically. But the fact is that they didn't end up causing huge amounts of wars. They didn't pollute the crap out of the earth. They didn't, create an economy that became more important than their humanity. And it was because they lived within the idea that death is going to happen, but because we come from the earth and we return to the earth, we're never really dying, right? And that's why there was all this respect for their ancestors. There was a respect for their predecessors, the stories of before, right? It was because they saw themselves as an extension of it, rather than it happened before now, and if I die now, it's all over. And that's a Christian thing, right? Or rather, that's an egotistical thing. My old programming is there. I don't like Christianity. I've said that many times, right? But I feel like that about most monotheistic religions, because we focus on death like it's the point. Like, a Christian's highest aspiration is often to die, because that's when they'll meet Jesus. And that's terrifying and really sad, because they're missing the entire point, or they're missing the kingdom, as it were, waiting for the kingdom that they're going to die and they have to start over again anyway.
Yeah,
Might as well enjoy it while you're here.
exactly. Yeah, yeah, the idea of it's all a lot of what we've just talked about is kind of tied together. The idea of thinking we have this idea of control and thinking that we know what's best. And we have all these ideas of what's best and the right thing to do. And if we just do this, things will be good. And it's like, even when it comes to like, we're not getting into the topic we discussed, we're not going to get into, but something like, curing cancer, for example, objectively good thing, many would say, or curing, say, 10 of the most deadly diseases. All of a sudden, we have a population issue, kind of like the same thing with the tribes, discovering agriculture, and all of a sudden there's not enough land and too many people, and they start killing each other. So it's like, people get so stuck on this idea of control and knowing what's best, and even down to the littlest thing of getting worried about a job interview, thinking that job is the best thing for you. And it's like, that job could be a horrible way to spend the next 2 years. And if you do you don't get it, then you might find a job you do like. And then it's like, well, then what do I do? It's just like, do your best and don't worry.
Exactly. Just shut up, move forward. That's pretty much it. That's try to relax as best you can.
I like how I made that into like, oh, just do your best and don't worry. Like, oh, jolly good time. And like, it does come down to that, but like how deep that runs of the uncertainty, because at this point, and I think it's well expressed, but it's still very much like in a hypothetical situation that may happen in the future. It's not like, here, you don't know what's best, because that's where that kind of goes hand in hand with faith in yourself and not having so much hesitation or concern to just whatever the fuck is something you want to say, like you saying it, as opposed to keeping maintaining certain things or perspectives or ways of being that then get in the way of you just being yourself and expressing yourself in whatever way that is. So it's funny how I use that example that, oh yeah, job interview, but it comes back to moment. That same insight is like, you do not know what's best. Pick something and pay attention, fucking find out and do it again.
Yeah, what I like is, again, you're not wrong. Just keep moving forward. Try and keep it light. It's like, you're not wrong. It's just so funny that we know these things. It's just that as our experience of life deepens, we have to deepen our understanding of what we know in terms of those things, right? Like, the more we start to see all the considerations of life, the more it is even more true that you need to just keep going and keep things light. So I thought that was kind of funny that it's always the same thing. Like, you can keep saying the same words, but when you come back to it, they mean something different because you are in fact different. It's just like a car accident, right? You're going to get injured less the more relaxed you are.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, bracing, trying to control how little moves inside of your body.
But that's it, right? And that's what we do with life. We build a little cage. We're like, I'm prepared now. It's like, no, you're brittle. You're easy to break. That's the problem, right? And this is why Jesus's whole thing of the meek shall inherit the earth, right? The meek are those who just adapt to the change. They don't worry about their preferences and their opinions. This is just what is. This is what needs to be done now, regardless of the aching or what I want to happen.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And that's just living in what is. But yeah, it's interesting. It's we are going to continue to have this problem so long as we don't recognize that we're all one, because that's the thing about our fear of death, is it really does stem from our overcommitment to the perception that we're divided, right? Like, you asked me if I'm afraid of death, and I said I'm not. And to be honest with you, the reason I'm not is because if I died right now, I would continue on as you and everybody else, right? And that's the whole reason I'm not afraid of death, because I'm not Ray, right? I experience Ray, but that's not me.
Yeah. So this idea, because a lot of people they'll say, like, we're spiritual beings experiencing a human, and it's like, that's the same exact thing as just being a human. Essentially, it's just maybe you have less anxiety about it because you feel like you're not a human, but you're still an individual divided. And it's like, well, no, we're pieces of source, and it's like, to me that seems closer.
It's closer.
But yeah, but it's still, the
Divided.
spiritual being having a human experience. It's like, that's just like the same thing, just on a different sort of parallel
Big time.
path.
Yep.
I've
said the same. I got a lot of hate for a comment or a video I made, I think probably a month or two after you started following me, but it was something along the lines that spirituality is not the same as awakening, right? Spirituality is just another exercise in ego because it still perceives a division. It still perceives a me and the thing that I believe in, or me and the thing that I'm an extension of. And again, it always comes back down to this. And I'm saying that all religion or all spiritual conversations, all conversations about awareness are going to revolve around the same very uncomfortable insight that it's really just you. And we try to avoid that. We're like, oh, I'm a spiritual being having a human experience. It's like, okay, so what you've done is you've taken out some of the fear in perceiving yourself as a strictly physical being, which is great. And it means if you die, you're not going to die because you're not just your body. That's good. That's lowered the amount of stress in your life. That's fantastic. Now let's go an even step further and say that we don't even know what human being means, right? Because I don't. At the end of the day, I can describe it. I can describe the physicality of it, right? But I can't describe the conscious things that are available to me. I can't describe what's possible with this body, and we know that. We know that the body is capable of doing things that we still don't understand. Like there have been spontaneous healings. There have been all kinds of evidence that there in non-local awareness, like to be able to separate a part of a person's body, move it miles away, and then conduct a test on that person and have that person's body respond miles away at the exact same time implies that there is more happening than we are willing to look at, right? Because everything is connected. And so we're like, oh, I'm a human being. Like that answers the question. Like that does anything at all. It's all that's done is describe the form, right? Like all I've done is limited myself to the form. I don't believe I'm a human being. I don't believe I'm anything. I'm just here. That whatever that might mean, I'm just here. And any concept I put on that is me just wanting to feel more comfortable.
I really appreciate how you dove into I don't know that I'm human in the first episode. I forget how much we covered because this is one of our shortest episodes also. This is under an hour that we cover like fucking 10 or 12 different topics and like kind of weaved through it. Like it's a very good just like a fucking fantastic intro to the podcast. And yeah, I know Levi and Jazz, yeah, scratching the surface. Like the fact that that's and the human part is so funny because I was just so fucking curious, still am so fucking curious in a very similar way because the humanity thing, like that hits right now. It's so funny how we go through ups and down cycles of different things, but it's all like trying to hold on to something like, oh, just let me know something. But I appreciate you digging into that in episode 1.
I love the fact that we just, well, I figured why fuck around, right? Like we're having the conversation. Let's start it off on a solid foundation. But on the other hand, I also knew that this would scare off anybody that wasn't willing to look at it this way. Like people would be offended by this point. They would already make judgments by this point because there is a mentality that just does not want to feel uncertain. And so we questioned a lot in this episode. So anybody who makes it through this episode and continues into the podcast is likely reflecting the kind of courage that we were talking about and that you were in fact embodying.
I just want to put in a box. That's all it is. And as soon as I do, I'm in a prison.
What about the idea of awareness?
Even that, it's just an idea, right? The description is never the described. And again, this is the reason I really enjoy talking to you, is because that question there is deeply uncomfortable for people. Like, you just took all of the certainty that I offered our listeners in providing a nice conceptual ribbon, and you just open that package back up and you're like, okay, well, hold on a second. That's not an answer either. And you're right, it's not. Because we are not awareness. Awareness is just a word trying to describe the nature of what we are, or what we perceive ourselves to be, right? And it's the closest we get. I used to use the word consciousness, right? But that caused all kinds of merry hell for me, because as soon as I use the word consciousness, people think human consciousness. They think the way we think, right? Whereas awareness is just the basic awareness of being. It doesn't have to involve thought or identity or concepts or anything else, right? Like a plant is aware, like I was saying. So if we can break that down, if we can really look at the most basic elements of what awareness is, then we at least start to revolve around the point. But as you so eloquently pointed out, it's not the point, right? The point is still
So-
what remains underneath.
Yeah. So it's just like just what is sort of, and I feel like that's maybe the closest, because I've been using awareness because I think that's the closest I've come to how it feels, sort of just an awareness. There's nothing about it. There's no form, thoughts, ideas. And yet, as I say, awareness, it's still just a thought, idea, word, just like everything else. But I think, I think it's maybe a little bit closer, but I guess the description of just, we are what is.
We are what is, and everything else is us trying to describe it or appreciate it or communicate it, or come to some kind of an idea of what it is. But this is why our show is so appropriately named, because it's dualistic unity. It's the fact that it's all one thing that we experience in duality, that we perceive in duality, and that's the gift. See, that's the thing, is that, and this is a common sentiment in spiritual crowd, is, this is my last incarnation on this planet. I'm done. Once I've learned all the lessons this time, and I always have the same expression on my face, like buckle up. Your eternity. Like, you don't get to leave. You just get to experience everything. So it's either you're going to do something with this lifetime or you're not. But this is not all there is, right? So you can get caught up in it or not. And oddly enough, it's when we stop getting caught up in the story we tell ourselves that we get the chance to change it. We can actually make different decisions as soon as we start to let go of what we think our path is, because we're just blinding ourselves. Recently watched a movie, Free Guy. I don't know if you've seen it, with Ryan Reynolds.
I haven't, not yet. I do. I'm a big Ryan Reynolds fan.
My God, the movie's brilliant. It's just brilliant. And I'm not going to ruin it for you, but it's very much this conversation in a symbolic form. It's really about seeing what's been in front of us the entire time, when we let go of the narrative that we think is real. And that's unity at the end of the day. Every religion has said the same thing. It's just seeing past the division. It's just, well, every religion, every spiritual person who has become aware of themselves. Usually those are the people that religions are formed from. So I'm not going to give religion the same credit, because religion just works off of other people's hard work.
I just keep shitting on religion. It makes me so happy.
Yeah, and I was in a spot where I was not giving two shits. I mean, at that point, I think I had been like fully kind of, for the most part, every component of religion. I was like, that's absurd. That's ridiculous. And so I was all about the shitting out. But I like, because I can remember now, and this might be a little preview. I think it was in episode 2, because I think it was after my first mushroom trip. Like, the main insight I came away with was like, oh, everything just is. And like, I'm saying it here, but I remember it hitting so hard, because it was all of a sudden all of these ideas of society, myself, like myself was starting to get questioned. So it's interesting that back and the forth between, environment versus self questioning, and it goes hand in hand. I mean, there is, same thing, and it just keeps going through uncertainty. Like, oh, maybe that whole idea of fucking shit. Anyway, I'm like fucking thinking I'm on an episode now, but this, yeah, I like that I mentioned that, because I'm pretty sure that's one of the main things I came away from that first mushroom trip with was. And so it's funny seeing it beforehand.
And once again, a moment for me of hearing somebody go, so it's just what is. Just made me incredibly happy. I'm like, yeah, exactly. Like, it's exactly that simple. That's exactly what it is. Because then the rest is just unraveling that. It's just the reconciling of this different way of looking at life. That's what the integration period is. That's what the challenge is after seeing it, after catching a glimpse of it. All of a sudden, after that, it's just digging further into it, questioning it even more, and finding more faith in yourself every step of the way. This is fun.
But the people that religions are based upon are usually the people who went, oh, this isn't anything like we think it is. That's why often those people were just weird. In general, like you had prophets who were walking around naked or walking around, dirty half the time. And it's because they didn't care. They were too busy being full of fire at seeing what was in front of them. And our culture would put those people in a rubber room.
Yeah, seriously. I know. I think about that sometimes. If there was ever a second coming of Christ or something, would they ever notice? Given what he was actually saying, it's like it's almost the opposite of, especially with in the West, how westernized Jesus has become. He's like this
You mean white
hippie.
Jesus? Yeah.
Yeah. It's like he's this Middle Eastern dude who's like probably did a ton of drugs and figured shit out. It's like,
Yeah.
he's become this good schoolboy who happened to have long hair.
Yeah, we're going to ignore the fact that he kicked over a table and started whipping people in a temple. Right?
Yeah.
By far my favorite Jesus story. Right? It's like, okay, so obviously he still had opinions. Yeah. Obviously he's still, and I haven't made this TikTok post as yet, but it'd be a good conversation for our next podcast, I'm sure. Contrary to what Christians would like to say, I think Jesus screwed up. I think that Jesus screwed up. I think that he missed the window. I think that to some degree, what he was saying was true. I am the way, the truth, and the life. That I, and we are all the same I, is the only way, truth, and life that there will ever be, that we're all the same thing. But that he kept saying, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And as a result of being surrounded by egotistical people, they went, he is the way, the truth, and the life. And I think that it would be more effective, as we are doing now, to tell everybody else, you are the way, the truth, and the life. You are far more important than my perspective of me. And that was the one thing that really changed for me between my video in 2005, which you mentioned at the beginning of the show, and now, was that back in 2005, there was still a lot of me. There was still a lot of, I am awareness. I am the universe. I am. All that's changed is that I'm less and less attached to the idea of I. Right. Oddly enough, that's made things a lot easier for me.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I can imagine. There's not too many fears and worries coming to that realization.
Right. Because I mean, what's the worst that can happen? I adapt.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Huh. Yeah.
I think this would be a good place to.
See, and it's funny because over the 20 or so years that led up to this conversation, I had come to a point where I could recognize when somebody was cerebrally tired, where basically they had taken in enough where they were almost fucking rubbery. And you could see it on your face. At this point, you're just like, wow, I couldn't eat another bite. And it was a good place to wrap up, I thought.
Yeah, that's some solid sensitivity right there. Because, yeah, I can remember vaguely kind of being there, and that the last bit, and just realizing now how much we covered, because that's, it was just a bunch of shit that I was starting to realize. Oh, nothing's what I think it is. I'm not what I think. I'm not the story that I tell myself. And so we just cover so much in this. So yeah, I mean, yeah, it was cool, and to see that kind of just going through and realizing, because I forget in episode 1 just how much we cover. So it's a fantastic buffer for people, because yeah, we go through a lot, and like from applicable stuff to just the depths of different things. But yeah.
And episode 1. This has been a great conversation. And as our
Sounds
listeners
good.
can tell, we are going to get about as deep into stuff as we can. We're going to try and avoid the really uncomfortable bits, because I know that we're going to get some backlash for that, but we're going to skirt around them as much as we can. We're going to really deep dive on a lot of this stuff, because it's not a conversation that you really get to have in your day-to-day life. I've run across maybe a half dozen people in the last 20 years that I can talk to about this stuff, and even then, it's only to a certain limit. So I understand that there are going to be things that we're going to talk about on this show that aren't going to sit well with everybody, but I would ask that they give us a little bit of patience and indulgence, because given enough time, we will eventually bridge that gap and make it make sense from both perspectives. So it's really just about exploring it and coming back to the idea that there's nothing wrong with questioning, so long as we're not trying to hold on to an answer.
Exactly. And I think on that point, for people listening, if you are, specifically curious about a certain thing, feel free, DM us, comment on posts about this, questions that you have specifically. If there was something that was said, it's like, I kind of get this, but can you spend a little bit more time? And, we'd be happy to discuss further. I think there's an infinite amount of things that we're going to get into on here, barely scratching the surface. And I know I'm incredibly excited.
Me too. I'm so excited. And again, the less that we think about ourselves, the more our audience is an extension of us, and we're all going to have this conversation together. We're having one collective conversation with ourselves.
Exactly.
Awesome. That's really good.
Oh man. I forgot that. I love that I'm the one that said we're just scratching the surface here. Like, I totally forgot, because we just covered a fuckload of shit that I still am not even close to fucking wrap my head around. Or I guess the biggest shift has been just thinking that it is something that I can explain or get across to someone else as if that is a thing. So yeah, fucking A, dude. That is an awesome episode.
That was great for sure. And what I enjoy about that is basically that was a trip. Like, there was enough questioning there of everything about existence and reality that one would find themselves in a state of uncertainty just through following along through that episode, which is why I say it would scare a lot of people off. They would just get uncomfortable and stop listening. But for anybody else to go through that episode would be kind of a fun ride, because you'd be like, yeah, that's true. And fuck those Christians, but just a little bit of extra gravy in there. The point is that it's just questioning things and admitting that it's okay to be uncertain, admitting that it's okay to go through everything that you're going through, but that there is a reason you're going through it. And there is a misunderstanding of existence as a whole. There is a perception that is blinding us to the truth that everything is connected, regardless of how obvious that might seem. So I love the fact that we really fucking went to town in this episode in the brief hour that it was, and I remember thinking, this is a great introduction, not just for Andrew to all of the shit that I'm going to talk about, but for our listener. So it was very much, okay, let's start easy, because the first half of the episode leads through a lot of stuff, and then the second half of the episode just deep dives. So that was a lot of fun.
And it's funny too, because and it's not to say that you were trying to curate anything, but I think I discounted like how long 20 years of chewing on this shit is, and then having the opportunity of someone who's like just openly very curious about all of it, not really being like, no one makes me
and quick. Right? And you weren't looking for anything to follow. You weren't looking necessarily for the right answer. You were looking at something that was a new perspective that required some investigation. That's the enthusiasm that you came into the conversation with. This is cool. And that's the best way to approach this conversation. Because if you're looking at this conversation like, is this going to lead me to the promised land? Will I become more enlightened? Will I? And it throws everything off. But from the very start in this episode, you were curious, you were skeptical, right? But you were enthusiastic. And so it was really just about being willing to continue on in the conversation. And that is reflective of your own state of mind at the time. You were willing to question things because you had invested in certain states of mind that weren't working. And then you came to a point where you're like, fuck, I'm not Andrew. And if that's the case, then everything I've ever invested in based on that fiction of Andrew is questionable. So that's it. Everything else is questionable. That's the path.
And fucking perpetually questionable. And it's funny coming full circle because even now, like, I am very much enjoying listening back to this because there's a lot of stuff because it rings true no matter where you're at, what you're going through, what you're dealing with, and no matter how much maybe you've, you know, recognized things or whatever that means, like even all of that, like in these early episodes, as much as there was I don't think I was really trying to become more of anything. It definitely, I think, getting into the conversation, it was very much like the conversation was a thing. Like it wasn't necessarily the full circle. Like we were talking earlier in the episode about the physicality of things and recognizing, there's no disconnect. There's, the molecules in the air is no different than what we're made out of. And that was kind of where I was chilling for a bit. And it wasn't quite letting go of so much of my certainty about things. And that allows you to almost build a certainty that can give you the illusion that there's a right way to get things across, like, which allows you to maintain the idea there's a right thing to say and do moment to moment going into any situation. There's some structure that's like the right way to do a fucking commentary series, even like this stuff is just hitting me now. Like, oh, there's no right way to do this. We can just fucking get baked and laugh and talk about whatever thoughts come up as we're going through that. Like that's hit 2 years later, but it's the same, it's circling the same exact sort of insights of fucking uncertainty.
Exactly. I'm almost tempted to, microdose some mushrooms when we get into episode 2 commentary, just for the sake of, being in that mindset a little bit more. Not that I'm not already, but it'd be fun. Anyway, this has been a lot of fun. I'm very much enjoying the trip down memory lane, as it were. But I do want to mention, and it's funny because you were saying, I know you're not curating it. No, I to some degree, I really was. Like, I remember very much a lot of contemplation being involved with season 1 for me, because I was trying to gloss over everything, kind of like, here's what you're getting into. I know you're not going to take all of this in, right? And then after the fact, break it down into digestible chunks, because you cannot get all of this at one point. Like, because then you're just getting a concept. There's nothing to get, is the point. But it takes forever to understand that, because you have to go through all of these concepts to finally realize, oh, fuck, I'm looking at concepts. Right. So yeah, this first season especially was, how deep can I keep this before I scare him off? And how can I scale it so that way it's never just hammering you with deep shit without there being scaffolding underneath? And so, yeah, there was a lot of that in season 1. That's why season 1 to me was it felt like I was putting into application everything I had learned up until that point about people, about sensitivity, about where they're coming from, about, the investment in ourselves, the empathy with yourself, not judging yourself for all that shit. It really did feel like all of that was coming up to like, okay, here's your TED Talk, go nuts. Right. And so all of a sudden we had this conversation going, and I have to say, I didn't know it would continue. I was thoroughly expecting you to just bolt at some point around the recognition that you were reality itself and eternal. And you haven't, and you didn't. And I know it's sometimes tempting to do so, but you can't run from yourself. Right. So, yeah, no, this has all gone so well in a way that I could not have imagined when we recorded this first episode. I am so excited about Dualistic Unity existing, the community itself, everybody in the comment section, everybody who's listening to this. Hello, listener. It's so nice that you could be here because 2 years ago, when we recorded this episode, you weren't. And it's nice to know that it's just out there for people like you to find, specifically for you to find.
Well said. Yeah, it's so fucking interesting. Ah, fuck, I had another point. Maybe that's good. Oh, just saying how impressive it was because I never felt like there was any curation whatsoever. Like I never felt like, and I could see in with someone with a mentality of more control and like getting to the right thing, there would be like, more of a push for topics. I never felt like that. I don't think it was until over a year in that you mentioned that you had some semblance of an idea of how you wanted to kind of not structure, but just like, yeah, there was something extra. I never felt like that at all. So I think it just goes to show like where that sensitivity was and the willingness to like, you know, have some contemplation, but also not choosing it as this is it. Cause the whole time I just felt like I was digging through stuff I was having insights about every week. And I was like, oh, this, oh, this, oh, this, and just kept coming week after week with, different thoughts. Cause I was, especially during the first 2 months, I was doing a fuckload of mushrooms that fall. Once it hit me that, oh, these are absurd, that it's illegal. Yeah, so that definitely informed a lot of the insights early, and not that they wouldn't have happened, but yeah, things have a way of being seamless, right?
For sure. And it's interesting because it wasn't so much curating topics so much as because really all we're ever doing is going in one of two directions, towards ourselves and responsibility and awareness and uncertainty, or away from ourselves into the fiction of us and control and our assumptions and all that stuff. So it's always just looking at how quickly we're going towards that relaxation and that uncertainty, because it's easy to either get stuck, to make an assumption, to stick on it and then not want to move, and so you got to question that. But on the other hand, you can question so quickly that you worry panicking yourself, or you risk panicking yourself. So on that level too, it's kind of like maybe we won't go down that road right there. Like we never got into the Illuminati or secret societies or anything like that until it came up in a community topic, right? And so that's what I mean, is that over time I've just kind of learned like there are applicable parts of this conversation, and then there are parts of the conversation that, although cool, will actually just throw you right the fuck off. And so that's what I mean by curated, not planned by any means, but very delicately walked through. There was always an aspect of being super sensitive to where the conversation was going because it was so important, I guess is the best way to put it.
Yeah, no, and it was certainly felt and appreciated. But yeah, and because it's, and that's the thing, and like we can wrap up soon here, but with that first episode, like we did go quote unquote deep with stuff. Like you did say stuff that was, so even me thinking like, you kind of curated, it was more just uh, feeling it as we went with the
Exactly.
sensitivity. Yeah. It wasn't a preset. It was maintain that sensitivity throughout the episode, throughout the conversation, because we cover a bunch of shit in the first episode, and then it's just how much pushed into that we get, how quick. Because yeah, but it always just felt like I was, coming to each episode with, oh, this hit me this week, and yeah, so
And for me, it was an exercise in application to a very large degree. You know, there were always points where I was informed by the discussion with you, but there were also points where I'm like, I don't know what my answer to this is. Speak. You know, like the part where you're like, well, I'm waving my hand, but you're not waving my hand. And the response, oddly enough, you know, I just did. I had never given that response up until that point. That had never come out of my mouth. It was never something that, and I had always wondered, like, how would I respond to that? I didn't know. That was the first time that that response had come out, and it was appropriately for episode 1. So, yeah, no, it very much is, as with everything, a relationship. It's a dance. You're going back and forth. You're informing one another so long as you're willing to just keep going. Right. The only thing is that, again, I had been talking to people for so long that I had built a certain degree of sensitivity to when it gets a little bit too much and when I have too much of a need to get something across. That was the point, is that through season 1, I was really just letting go of my own need to get anywhere, watching where the conversation went, and then just kind of going, all right, let's go this way a bit more. You know, it's like, oh, hold on. All right, we're going too fast. Well, rein that shit in, you know, that kind of thing. And it was just, again, oversensitivity over time, right? It's just learning that. And so, yeah, no, it's been a hell of a lot of fun. This has been a fun part 2 to our commentary series. I'm really looking forward to episode 2. We're going to wrap up here, though. Thank you for joining us, everybody who could do so in the live section. We'll see you soon.
Bye, everyone.